Under an endless silver night, when even the wind feared to move, the blackthorn pack gathered beneath the ancient moon, unaware that history was about to fracture forever. The stone courtyard lay cold and silent, torches flickering weakly as if they too sensed judgment approaching, and at the edge of the circle stood a girl the pack barely remembered noticing. Her name was Naira, though most had long stopped speaking it. She was known only as the silent girl, the one who never spoke, the one whose eyes carried depth but no voice, the one who existed quietly in the shadow of wolves who believed power must always roar. Naira stood still as the Alpha approached, her posture calm, her breathing steady, as if silence itself had taught her patience beyond fear. Alpha Rieger Blackclaw, ruler by strength and dominance, towered above her, his golden eyes glowing beneath the moonlight, his presence heavy with authority and finality. He saw no destiny when he looked at her, only absence, only stillness, only what he believed to be weakness, and in that moment, ignorance disguised itself as certainty. His voice broke the silence like a blade slicing through night air as he declared that she had no wolf, no power, no future among them. The word rejection echoed through the courtyard, sinking into stone, fur, and bone alike, heavier than death itself. Naira lowered her head, not in shame, not in submission, but in understanding, because somewhere deep within her, she had always known this night would come. The pack watched without compassion as Rieger stripped her of protection, of name, of belonging, ordering her to leave before the night surrendered to dawn. No one noticed the moon dim for a breath, as if holding sorrow. No one noticed the forest beyond the boundary stones lean closer, listening. Naira turned away without tears, stepping beyond the safety of the pack, and into the forbidden woodland where ancient trees twisted skyward like forgotten gods and roots clawed at the earth as if guarding secrets older than the wolves themselves. The night welcomed her differently than it welcomed others, shadows parting gently, the ground firm beneath her feet as though it remembered her steps. She walked deeper, guided not by sight or sound, but by a pull that resonated within her chest, a quiet hum growing stronger with every breath. When she finally stopped, placing her palm against the bark of a massive ancient tree, the forest responded. A low vibration traveled through the earth, leaves shimmered silver, and moonlight bent unnaturally toward her form. The silence that had followed her all her life suddenly felt alive, and within it, a voice emerged, not loud, not cruel, but eternal, calling her daughter of silence, telling her she had waited long enough. Naira fell to her knees as tears traced her cheeks, not from fear or pain, but from recognition, because for the first time the world was speaking her language. She had never spoken because her voice was not meant for wolves or men. It belonged to the moon veil, an ancient force older than alphas, older than packs, older than the idea that strength must always be seen. As she rose, silver markings bloomed across her skin, glowing softly like moonlit scars, and her shadow shifted, stretching and reshaping until it mirrored the moon itself. The forest bowed, spirits awakening from centuries of slumber, spectral wolves emerging from mist to circle her in reverence. Naira was no outcast. She was the lunar oracle, chosen not for her roar, but for her silence, not for dominance, but for balance. Far away, beneath the same moon, blackthorn pack began to crumble. Stone cracked, shadows twisted violently, and wolves howled in terror as the night turned against them. Rieger fell to his knees, clutching his chest as visions tore through his mind, showing Naira crowned in silver, the forest kneeling, the moon whispering her name with power that dwarfed any throne. He understood then, too late, that he had rejected not weakness, but destiny itself. Driven by guilt and fear, he ran into the forest, abandoning crown and pride, chasing the pull of a truth he could no longer deny. The woods judged him as he passed, spirits watching from shadow, roots shifting beneath his feet, every step a confession etched into darkness. When he finally found her, she stood beneath the moon, radiant and still, the world bending gently around her presence. Rieger fell before her, stripped of authority, voice trembling as he admitted his failure, but Naira's gaze held no anger. When she spoke for the first time, her voice was soft, yet the forest held its breath, the night leaning closer to listen. She told him he had not rejected her, only revealed himself, and in those words lay judgment deeper than punishment. Naira did not return to the pack, she rose above it. Yet the story did not end where legends usually fade into silence, because balance is not a crown that rests quietly forever. It is a weight that reshapes everything it touches. After the moon crowned her keeper, Naira did not vanish into myth or mist. She remained, walking the thin line between shadow and light, between wolf and forest, between destiny and choice. Nights grew heavier with meaning as her presence altered the rhythm of the world itself, and creatures who had long forgotten fear began to remember reverence. The forest no longer slept the way it once had. Trees whispered warnings, rivers slowed their currents to listen, and the moon watched longer than before, lingering as if unwilling to look away. Rieger followed her without command, without title, learning humility one step at a time as his former strength bent into patience. Where once he ruled by force, now he guarded by silence, standing at the edge of her power like a shadow that had learned its place. Wolves from distant territories began to feel the change first, sensing something ancient awakening beneath their paws, something that did not demand loyalty but commanded truth. Some resisted, baring fangs at the night itself, while others bowed without knowing why, their instincts recognizing a law older than dominance. Naira watched them all with the same calm gaze, knowing that balance does not choose sides, it reveals them. Each night she returned to the heart of the forest, where moonlight pooled like silver water and spirits gathered in quiet circles, seeking guidance not through words but through presence. She never shouted, never threatened, yet conflicts dissolved in her wake as if the night itself absorbed them. Stories spread among the packs, whispered around low fires, of a woman who could still a raging alpha with a single look, of a silence so heavy it made lies choke before they were spoken. Some called her a curse, others a blessing, but none dared call her weak again. Rieger watched her grow into the role the world had denied her, and in that watching, he understood the true cost of his ignorance. Every night, he relived the moment he had exiled her, not as punishment, but as remembrance, because devotion without memory is hollow. One night, when the moon bled red through storm clouds and the forest trembled with unease, Naira felt the balance fracture. Something old had stirred beyond the borders, something that fed on chaos and remembered a time before the moon held judgment. The silence around her thickened, not with peace, but with warning, and even the spirits recoiled. This was not a threat born of teeth or claws, but a forgotten hunger, an echo of a world that existed before order. Naira did not retreat. She stepped forward into the darkness, knowing that keepers are not chosen to be safe, but to stand where others cannot. Rieger followed without hesitation, though fear coiled in his chest, because for the first time, he was not protecting a crown, but a soul that carried the weight of all crowns. As they crossed into the fractured lands, the moonlight weakened, shadows thickened, and silence turned hostile, pressing against them like unseen hands. The entity revealed itself slowly, not as a beast, but as a distortion, a void where nature refused to exist, whispering promises of freedom from balance, from judgment, from consequence. It recognized Naira immediately, mocking her stillness, daring her to speak, to command, to dominate as others had failed. She listened because silence had always been her strength, and in that listening, she heard the flaw in its hunger. When she finally spoke, her voice did not rise. It resonated, weaving moonlight, forest, and memory into a single truth: that existence without balance devours itself. The void recoiled as the forest surged forward, roots binding darkness, spirits howling not in rage but in unity. Rieger stood firm beside her, shielding her body while she anchored the world, understanding at last that strength is not measured by how much you control, but by what you are willing to protect without recognition. When the darkness collapsed into nothingness, the night exhaled, stars reappeared, and the moon shone clearer than it had in centuries. Naira fell to her knees, drained but unbroken, and Rieger caught her, not as an alpha claiming his mate, but as a guardian honoring his vow. From that night on, the world remembered not just her silence, but her choice. She could have ruled. She could have commanded every pack. Instead, she chose to remain the unseen hand, the quiet presence that corrected imbalance before it demanded blood. The packs adapted, slowly, painfully, learning a new law where listening mattered more than roaring. Children born under her moon grew sensitive to silence, able to feel truth beneath words, and the forest flourished as it had not since the first howl was ever raised. Legends would later try to simplify her story, to call her a queen, a goddess, a myth, but those who truly knew understood she was something rarer. She was proof that exile can be awakening, that rejection can be the doorway to purpose, and that some souls are denied a voice not because they are meant to disappear, but because when they finally speak, the world must be ready to change. And under every quiet moon, when the forest breathes and wolves pause mid-step without knowing why, Naira still walks, unseen but present, keeper of balance, daughter of silence, reminder that power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. And when the cycles of the moon completed what fate had begun, the forest grew quieter in a way no night before had ever known. It was not the silence of fear, nor the stillness of waiting, but the deep, sacred quiet that arrives when something ancient has finally found peace. Naira stood one last time at the heart of the forest, beneath the oldest tree whose roots had once answered her call, and the moon hung low above her, full and unblinking, as if reluctant to let her go. The silver markings on her skin dimmed gently, not fading but settling, becoming part of her rather than a burden she carried. She had given the world balance, and now the world no longer required her to stand between its fractures. Rieger felt it before he understood it, the subtle loosening of the bond that had tied him to her presence, and fear gripped him not of loss, but of finality. He stepped forward, not as a guardian this time, not as a shadow, but as a man who had learned too late how precious silence could be. Naira turned toward him, and in her eyes was no sorrow, only completion. She told him without words that balance does not end. It continues through those willing to protect it, and that her path had never been to stay, only to awaken. The forest responded by bowing, leaves shimmering like stars fallen to earth, spirits gathering not in mourning but in gratitude. The moonlight wrapped around her softly, lifting her not in spectacle, but in grace, until her form blurred with silver and shadow, becoming less a body and more a presence woven into the night itself. Rieger dropped to his knees as the realization settled that love does not always mean possession, and devotion does not always mean proximity. When the light finally receded, Naira was gone, yet everything felt fuller, steadier, as though the world itself had exhaled after holding its breath for centuries. The forest returned to its natural rhythm, but it was changed forever, guided now by a memory that lived in roots, in wind, in moonbeams filtering through leaves. Rieger rose slowly, no longer empty, no longer broken, carrying her silence within him as a vow rather than a wound. He returned to the packs not to rule, but to teach, reminding alphas that strength without listening leads only to ruin. Generations passed, and Naira's name faded from spoken legend, but not from instinct. Wolves still pause beneath certain moons. Children still feel watched in moments of truth, and the forest still leans closer when silence falls. Because Naira did not die, she did not rule, and she did not disappear. She became what she was always meant to be, the quiet law beneath all howls, the unseen balance between dominance and mercy, the silence that remains after the last story is told. And when the moon glows a little longer than it should, and the night feels strangely complete, it is not an ending at all. It is her, still listening.